Welcome to the Mental Barbell, your go-to resource for everything mental performance. We're here to talk about sports psychology, and everything in between. Welcome to the ultimate mental performance journey. Welcome to the Mental Barbell. My name is Ian Reardon, and I'm joined today by Mr. Mike Mancini. Mike, how are you?
Just doing great, Ian. Love to see above 70-degree weather here in northern Indiana. So that's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Okay, well, up here in mid-Michigan, we're a little bit cooler, but hopefully that weather's coming our way soon.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it was tough. This past weekend was Masters weekend, so it was definitely tough watching, the weather down in Augusta, Georgia, sunshine and no clouds when we've
Yeah,
got
no
rain,
kidding.
and I think it even snowed here during the Masters. Um, so I do want to talk a little bit about that. I know this week has been a huge week for sports. We got, obviously Masters week, like I just mentioned. We've had March Madness, baseball, and the MLB is kicking off. We've also had some college national championships as well, hockey in particular. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about that and some of our reflections and things we noticed and learned from watching, some of the best athletes do their sports. Um, we also have a research review here for you all. Talks a little bit about how psychological skills training can affect anxiety and state anxiety specifically, that being how anxious you feel in any given moment and what skills we as mental performance coaches can provide to help you manage some of that stress. For our main topic today, we're going to talk a little bit about our underlying philosophy in sports psychology and what levers we have to help our athletes perform better, both improving their underlying trained potential, but then also removing some of those interferences and performance detractors that all athletes come in contact with. And then we have a little mental fitness challenge for you if you stick around till the end, something applied and that you can use right away that will help this week and hopefully the future be a little bit brighter for you and your performance see some improvements as well. So, Mike, I know that's a lot. Where would you like to start?
Let's start out with what just ended, the Masters. How about that? That was a pretty exciting finish, that's for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. We had Rory being the fourth ever Masters champion to repeat to defend his title, which was very exciting to watch. Going into that fourth day, he had the largest lead going into Sunday than any Masters champion has had, which was pretty exciting. But what were some of the things that you were watching for?
I wanted to see how he approached that, trying to repeat kind of a thing. And as you mentioned, he was sailing through the first couple of days there. And even I was getting texts from friends, excuse me, about, oh, we're going to have to wait because Rory always comes back to earth and something bad happens and so forth. And unfortunately for him, it did. He struggled on Saturday a little bit and even was kind of up and down yesterday as well too. So I wanted going in, I wanted to watch that, and then there was always a player or two someone's never thought of that kind of pops up to the forefront. And there was a couple there. Cameron Young was challenging Rory for a while there. That I don't think he's at the top of everybody's list when they talk about who might win at a majors championship. But so those are the kind of things I was kind of looking for.
Yeah, and that's really interesting to think about. Some of those underdogs. Maybe playing out of their spikes a little bit and playing better than maybe they expected. And I wonder, thinking about those two situations, right, with Young and McIlroy. McIlroy has everything to lose, right? He's the top of the mountain, kind of looking down at everybody chasing him, and then you've got these other players who they're just out there, seeing what they've got, seeing if their stuff stacks up. And I think those two approaches couldn't be, further apart, but still, doing the same thing, which I think is really interesting. Um, do you think that there's a way for someone like Rory to, you know, try to recreate some of that like nothing to lose mindset, or do you think it's better for him to have some of that pressure behind him?
It's interesting because in the press conference immediately afterwards, they, they asked him essentially that, and he said he was watching the leaderboard a lot, which was counterintuitive to what you just mentioned. A lot of those guys, especially as they get to like Saturday and even maybe even into Sunday, they're just out there playing shot to shot, hole to hole. There's so many times I've seen interviews during golf tournaments where we'll talk to a player and they say, I don't even know where I was at until I asked my caddy on 15 or 16. But Rory was exactly the opposite. He's like, because he fumbled around, I want to say he double bogeyed 4 or something early on
Yep.
that brought him really back to the pack. And he said, I needed to know where I was at to see what I needed to do. So it was, for him, it was a calibration of an expectation or an outcome piece. What do I need to do here? And which is kind of counterintuitive a little bit. But he used that as a way to kind of recalibrate, knowing then that even though he stumbled, he was like, I'm still in it. And then he essentially regrouped and went through a regroup process and stayed with his process throughout, even to 18. He was up by 2 shots on 18, and his tee shot went into the woods. And we all kind of gasped at our house that we're watching it, going, uh-oh, he's going to lose his 2-shot lead. It's going to go into a playoff or worse. And then he comes right back and makes a great shot out of the trees, and then it goes into the sand and a great shot out of the sand as well too to win the match. So it was essentially the last round was a microcosm of what we talk about with our athletes on a regular basis in terms of staying in, hanging in, understanding that even though a couple of things went haywire, that's kind of the normal process. Rarely does anything become a perfect game, a perfect round, a perfect match, whatever the case may be. And in his case, he continued to tell himself that I'm still here, I'm still good. Tapping back into his confidence and staying resilient and staying within that process. And he ends up being where he wanted to be at the end. But it was a real test of, I think, resilience and being able for him to tap into the confidence of who he is and who he can be as a player.
Yeah, and I love you using the word process there. Something that he had mentioned, he worked with, I don't know if it was a sports psychologist or a coach or a caddy, but that his kind of mantra going into that Sunday was process over prize. So instead of thinking about, the green jacket and what that 18th putt is going to look like, it's what does this shot look like? What's my next shot? And I think so often our mindset or our athlete's mindset is kind of on a knife's edge, right? So like he hits that shot into the woods, and it could be very easy for an athlete to then, exactly like what you said, start thinking like, uh-oh, this is where I stumble, right? This is where it all falls apart. And it's that mindset that then affects the next play and causes that outcome. And so just being able to stay in it enough to hit that next shot and keep yourself in it. I think so often we build this idea of like resilience and mental toughness up to be like a Herculean effort, when in reality it's really just staying in it just enough for the next shot, right? Just enough for the next shot. And I think that's what he did, and was able to come out with the win. So I thought the process over prize mantra was great. And it really showed up, I think, a number of times.
Yeah, and to your point beforehand about some of the newcomers and how they kind of throw caution to the wind because it's like nobody's expecting of that of me, and that's that mental piece we talk with athletes about all the time, and the idea of trying to go into a match or a round or a game with that attitude can be challenging at times, especially if you're quote unquote expected to do well. If you've had success, you can tell yourself, I need to have success this time out. And you consistently then, that the challenge becomes not to consistently judge yourself against that outcome and to try and play with that trust and I've got nothing to lose mentality in the sense of I'm just going to go in and just have fun and play the best I can in this moment, whether it's a free throw we talk about, and we'll talk a little bit about Final Four and March Madness a little bit here, or a shot that Rory has to make, or Cameron Young or Justin Rose or whoever the case may be in yesterday's Masters. But it's trying to consistently have that mindset of let's just go and see what happens. And that's a challenge. That's hard. To try and match that and not keep that expectation piece as part of your mind. But that's what, as you mentioned, what we try and work with athletes on a regular basis.
Yeah, and it gets harder when you're at that pro level where you've got sponsorships and endorsement deals, and you're going to have to be interviewed after it. I think that's a lot. That's there's levels to this. So like if you're listening and you're a high school athlete, you might feel like the high school state meet is the most pressure cooker environment you're going to be in, but NCAA's is even more than that, right? The Olympics is more than that. There's always something some bigger and more more, I want to say, stressful, right? Like more pressure inducing environments. And so it's great to kind of practice the environment you're in, kind of knowing that you're going to find yourself in bigger and bigger moments. I think that's really important to know. Um, I also thought, it hasn't really made the news or the rounds in the American media much, but there are some pretty severe protests going on in Ireland right now, and I know, Rory's Irish, and I wonder how much some of the global kind of turmoil has impacted him. I know they kept showing um, clips back to his home course and all of
Right.
his teammates cheering him on there, but I wonder, how these athletes are able to block out some of that, those more global distractions. I also had athletes, that I trained who were, Ukrainian going in, and competing when you don't know if your hometown is going to be under siege or not. And I wonder, if that level of kind of distraction is harder to remove yourself from rather than something that's more immediate. Or if that's just so pervasive that it's a little bit harder to distance yourself from. I didn't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think especially for athletes at that level, whether they're on the PGA Tour or NBA, NFL, or even at the NCAA or Olympic level, we as outsiders of that environment forget that these men and women are human beings, number one. And even as you mentioned, as we work with a high school athlete or a small college athlete, so to speak, there are a lot of distractions. There's what test do I need? What exam do I have this week that I got to study for? Or finals coming up? Um, Personal relationships that are a part of it as well too. Something happened outside of the classroom or in a social element that can influence what's happening for them on the golf course or the basketball court or the football field and whatnot. And it is uh, an understanding that we have to have when we work with our clients as well too, and to help our athletes navigate their way to understand that for the next couple of hours or for the next 3 hours during your match or your game or whatnot, let's use some strategies to just hone in on that moment, and see if we can zero in on that versus what might be happening outside of their lives outside of sports as well too.
Yeah, I think that's really important. We talk sometimes about blocking out distractions, and we've talked about this on the podcast before. But it's kind of like the old trope is don't think of a pink elephant, right? The first
Right.
thing you think of is a pink elephant, and so to your point, I think it's much more effective to give yourself something positive to think about rather than try to push the negatives away. Your brain just doesn't really work that way. It doesn't really hear the word no or don't. We can all reflect on that with little kids. If you tell them, don't touch the stove, all they hear is touch the stove, right? It's the same thing with our own minds. So if you say, don't think about that recruiter in the stands. Don't think about, my college coach watching. That's all you're going to be able to think about. So to your point, what positive thing can I choose to focus on that will make me play better? Um, I wanted to maybe circle back to an idea I written down here, about the causal relationship between the mental states that we're talking about and why that shows up in performance. I think sometimes because we're so mental and focused on the mind, we sometimes neglect to talk about how that actually shows up for an athlete physically. And I think the Masters is a perfect example of this. So golf is a sport such that your body has to be relaxed. No one hits a golf ball well when they're tense. And even expanding that out now that I'm thinking, I don't know if there's many sports that you perform well when you're tense. Maybe like powerlifting, but that's pretty much the extreme example. And so when we have this anxiety, we call it psychological anxiety. It's when we're thinking about things, yeah, right? You have anxious thoughts, and that creates what's called somatic anxiety. So that's anxiety and stress of your body. And when you have that stress, you're just not able to execute motor patterns, execute movements as fluidly as is required. And so, if you're a golfer, thinking about your backswing, if you tense up right in the middle of your backswing, that's where it leads to a fly hook or kind of topping it into the ground, right? That's where the mistakes happen. And so being able to control the mental anxiety absolutely affects the physical anxiety, the body stress. And as athletes, that's where, that's our arena, that's where we're focused. And so we really need to understand why the mind affects the body, and to know why we want to address, some of those psychological things. So just wanted to maybe highlight that connection between anxiety of the mind and anxiety of the body.
Yeah, I know when I talk to athletes a lot, that's almost, and even especially when I talk with teams, that's almost one of the first things that we talk about is what is the connection between your mindset and your physical performance. And it starts out with thoughts, which then turn into emotions. So if you have a thought of, I'm not sure if I can make this putt, that emotion starts to be that I'm not sure this is going to happen again. I three putted, and you start to tense up, which then those thoughts turn to emotions, which turn into a physiological response. And if you're, like you said, if you're tensed up trying to shoot a free throw with 2 seconds left to go, or trying to hit a 3-foot putt to win the match, or at least separate yourself from someone else or get closer to the leader, whatever the case may be, if your shoulders are tight, if your arms are tight, or whatever piece of your body that you need to use to execute in that moment aren't working the way you want them to ideally, that's where it shows up, and your performance then shows up as well too. So that's the connection between starting out with how can we work with our thoughts and emotions and either redirect them or introduce some new ones to help us stay in as relaxed a spot as possible, so we can trust our swing or trust our free throw technique or whatever the case may be in the moment to be the best it could be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that covers a lot of my thoughts on the Masters tournament. You had mentioned watching the Final Four and some March Madness. What were some of your reflections? Maybe switching gears here towards college basketball.
Sure. Well, the initial reaction was just how kind of dominant University of Michigan was. They had a great year, and they just played lights out, in my opinion, during that whole tournament. But one of the things that kind of stood out a little bit for me on the mental performance side was after UConn got into the Elite Eight, and I forget who they beat to get there, but their coach Dan Hurley gave them some space. Instead of coming back with a hard practice the next day, he realized that there could be a little bit of a hangover with that, and gave his team some space to come back and play that semifinal game to get to the championship game. And he felt like that was important for them to kind of re-energize, collect themselves, regroup a little bit instead of continuing the hard practices and maybe not being ready to go, maybe a little bit physically, but as much mentally in that semifinal game as anything else. But unfortunately, even for them, they gave it a run, but Michigan was just kind of too tough for them. But that was the little mental performance piece that I took away from the Final Four and from the tournament itself this year.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because almost the what's the word I'm looking for? Like the typical coach reaction in that moment, right after a loss, is to storm into the locker room and start laying into guys and start yelling at them, and almost like the feeling of like, I need to remind you that you did badly, right? Like I need
Right.
to hammer this point home. And I think so often the athletes know, right? They know when things went well and went poorly, right? They probably have internalized that more than the coach knows. And so I think understanding that and like what you said with Coach Hurley, giving them the space to kind of deal with that disappointment on their own, and knowing that he didn't need to like add on to that, like pile on to that feeling. I think that's a really good, positive coach uh, relationship, and it treats your athletes like adults. I think so often coaches and bad coaches especially treat their, even if they're adult athletes, they treat them like infants, right? They're toddlers that need to be managed. And I think this is a much more mature Hurley's one of the legendary basketball coaches, even though they didn't come out on top this year. He's one of those coaching role models, I think, for reasons just like this.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you mentioned, that coaches like to be micromanagers in everything, but I almost feel basketball is almost at the top of the list with coaches. I'll practice all week long, intensified, and from the time they tip off, they're in their player's face until the final whistle. So yeah, I think it's a credit to him to kind of ease off a little bit to let them kind of regroup before getting back at it. And the other thing too, just in the final game, Michigan was really dominant, but diving into the numbers a little bit, they were 0 for 8 on their first 3-point try. So they didn't panic. And I think for them, it was a real confidence piece. We know we're playing well. We've had a great season. Yes, we went 0 for 8, but we didn't panic because we know that's just an aberration and that'll correct itself as long as we continue to stay in it. And we talked about process a few minutes ago, but stay with the process and keep going. And they did. And they ended up, UConn got close a couple of times a little bit towards the end, but they weren't able to really get over the hump and do anything with Michigan's team this year.
Yeah. Well, I love the word panic there. I think, tying that back to Rory's, shot into the woods on 18, that's exactly what he didn't do, right? He didn't panic in that moment. And I think, any athlete or person listening to this, panic is not the emotional state that you do anything well in, right? And that's, I think, a great point, is like it's that moment of panic that then leads to the outcome you're worried about. And so if you can keep your head cool just till the next shot, right? Just till that ninth 3-pointer that you end up sinking, right? Just keep yourself in the game long enough. I think that's fantastic. I did see an interview. I think it was with one of the Michigan like team managers, and something that he mentioned, which I thought was great, was that no one person on their team was trying to get all the glory. Like nobody was like singularly focused that they were the star that was going to make the game winning shot. It was a very, we over me mentality. And you heard that with the team manager, but I think you also saw that in a lot of the post game interviews. That the team is talking all about their teammates and the coach and the environment and all these things, rather than, oh, I made that dunk, I made that shot. And I think that's the mentality that leads to great teams. So, in practice, we focus on our personal skills, and then when we perform, we put those skills into the system. And that's, what leads to championships.
Yeah, and I remember hearing that for the first time. Ken Ravizza, a longtime sports psychologist that a lot of us in the field admire, obviously written a few books and so forth. But he mentioned as part of taking the pressure off of you is after an at bat, and maybe it was because he worked a lot with baseball teams. So if you had a bad at bat, and let's say you struck out and you walk back to the bench, you kind of give yourself a few moments to kind of process that, but with emotional composure. And he talked about how to do that. But one of the last things he said is always then what he called it, come to the rail, meaning you go back to the edge of the fence and you're supporting your teammates, because now you've shifted from your issue or challenge that you might be having and focused it back on your teammates and the team, which makes you a great teammate, but also lessens kind of the burden and the pressure off of yourself. If you're supporting the rest of your guys, your teammates in whatever sport you are, now you've put that focus on everybody else. And it's we talk a lot about gratitude, and I know we've talked about this on the podcast too, but it's almost a little bit of that where you're giving your thanks to the rest of the team, and here I'm for you as well too. And that just helps you exhale a bit and helps you relax as you go back out on the field, or the next play comes to you on the basketball court, or your next shot ready to go on a golf course as well too. So it all goes back to that. I think not only just being a great teammate, but also helping you out in the long run as well, also.
Yeah, 1,000%. And no sport. Well, I shouldn't say no sport because there definitely are individual sports, but one baseball player doesn't win a game, right? One pitcher doesn't win a game, unless they have a perfect game. But no team sports rely on one person, and I think that's a great point. As athletes, we're always focused on what we're doing because that's what we do. That's what sports is. But you're a part of a system, and so you are a contributor. You're not you're not the win or the loss for the group. And so being able to recognize that and you know figure out what's important, which is the team's performance. I don't know if you had many other thoughts on the March Madness, but I think there's also a great example of that from baseball's opening days, with Paul Skeens, if you want to move in that
Yeah,
direction.
absolutely. Yeah, we can segue into the MLB world as well too. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the Revisa idea I think is perfect for what I noticed with Paul Skeens' opening day. He is I think he's like the first pitcher to come back for 2 seasons with the strikeout average that he has. So there's obviously a lot of hype and a lot of pressure behind him, but he just did not show up opening day. I think he let's see, so he faced 9 batters, allowed 5 runs on 4 hits, 2 walks, and he hit a batter. So not the day that he wanted. But the thing that stuck with me is instead of what a lot of these starting pitchers will do is go back and start their rehab, right? They're getting to their street clothes. They're starting the wind down process after they've been pulled from the mound. But like what Ken Ravizza said, like what you said there expertly, is get back to the rail, and that's what he did. So he got pulled from the mound. He didn't mope, he didn't hang his head. He just went and stood right there next to his teammates and started cheering on the group goal, right? The team, the next pitcher that was out there. So I thought that was a really good kind of positive role model moment, especially for a lot of young athletes watching. But to your point, that's going to make him play a lot differently and better subsequent games because that pressure is taken off you a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it shows also to the rest of his teammates in that situation that he's there for them, even though he didn't have a great game. So maybe we can be there for him in another moment of challenge down the road. As you mentioned, no player is perfect, and I'm sure Skeens will have maybe not many, but another game or two where he may not pitch as well. And the other guys, knowing that he had their back, I think we'll see that as well too, and be supportive of him. And again, it'll come back to him knowing, you know what, I screwed up today. I didn't have my best stuff, or I made some mistakes, but I know everybody else is behind me. Because a lot of times we can, as athletes, personalize that. If we have a bad game, or what are my teammates going to think? They think I suck. I shouldn't be playing. Maybe this, maybe that, maybe that. Whereas that process is going to be alleviated because you've become a good teammate and supporting them, and they want to, for the most part, going to do the same as well too. So that's, and I'm seeing that more and more with especially starting pitchers who get taken out of games, that they're hanging around the dugout a lot more and being a part of the rest of the game, even though they know they're obviously not going back into the game, but they're being supportive of the rest of their group too. And I think that does mean a lot for team chemistry, team morale. But again, both personally and collectively as a team, that's a real benefit.
Yeah, it reminds me just anecdotally here. There was an interview. I think somebody was interviewing. I think it was a teammate of Deion Sanders when he was playing baseball, and they would talk about how everyone else would strike out and they'd come back and they'd smash their bat against the bench or chuck their helmet, and he was very professional about it. He I think the situation they were describing, he had struck out like three times that game, like just wasn't playing, but he just walks over, puts his helmet down, puts his bat up, and starts cheering. And they were like, they asked him about it, and he was like, I'm just happy to be here, right? I'm happy that I get to play this game, play this beautiful sport, be a part of this. And you could just see the teammate who was recalling this. It was a very like fond memory. It was someone that he enjoyed being on that team with that person. And I think it's stuff like that too that goes unnoticed. It's that the small interactions between teammates, that give you confidence on the field. Like you don't put them together, but it's those little cohesive moments, those positive, high five, handshake moments, good jobs. Those do matter, right? And they create environment on the team, a positive environment. You had mentioned in our pre-meeting here about some teams where everybody was leaving because of a bad environment, and this is really the opposite. You're trying to cultivate intentionally a positive, competitive environment.
Yeah, absolutely. It just makes a huge difference, again, for the player itself and then collectively for the team, and just kind of compounds itself as the season goes on. And all of the seasons, even if you're playing high school or you're playing a lot of games here in the northern part of the country, I work with some high school teams. I know you do as well too. They have a baseball season and they're compressing 25, 30 games into about 2.5 months or so. Whereas teams down in Arizona and Florida have been playing since January or February. So they're playing a lot of games back to back, cold weather, spitting rain, spitting snow, whatever the case may be. And you need to be that collective unit and as well as individually be able to be resilient, stay in the process, had a bad at bat, bad couple of bats, maybe even a bad game, stay in it, come back the next day and keep working that process, and things will manifest for yourself more so than they would if you're sulking and feeling like everybody's against you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And what we're really referring to there is the social support aspect of being on a team. And as we know from clinical psychology and from sports psychology research, that social support is huge, whether it be from positive role models as coaches, or a positive supporting family, or as we're kind of alluding to here, a positive team. That support network really makes athletes feel like they're not out on their own, right? They're not kind of on an island. And so um, you know, creating that supportive social environment can be really helpful. If you're a coach listening to this, those little moments where you see an athlete moping, or they're throwing their gear around, or expressing that disappointment, those are things that are important to stop, because they are very contagious. If someone sees someone else doing that, then they emulate that behavior, and it just spreads like a virus. And so trying to keep your athletes positively expressive is great. Um, in our realm, we also have kind of a different lever to work on that anxiety, and I want to move towards the research that we want to highlight this month. Um, but psychological skills training, it gives the athletes personal skills, personal psychological skills to not only kind of reframe situations so that they're not as anxiety inducing, but also kind of put anxiety and put situations into perspective. And athletes, a lot of times their sport is their life, and so wins and losses on the field can feel like wins and losses in life. And so having the right skills and training from professionals like us can help compartmentalize that, but also use um, that lower anxiety to perform better. So the study that I wanted to highlight today is from this year, so just came out. They took 21 athletes and ran half of them through a 6-week psychological skills training program, and then half the group just conducted normal sports training. And then they tested them pre, during, and post with the perceived stress scale. And so the researchers found some what I thought was very interesting results. And so I might throw up an image here for you to kind of visualize the results. But what this research team found was that the athletes that had done the psychological skills training not only showed less anxiety, so less state anxiety, but they also showed a narrower range of anxiety. So what that means is it's less um, varied. There's less peaks and valleys of anxiety. It's more in a controlled range, and that controlled range was lower than the average stress scale of the control group, the group that did not receive the psychological skills training. So not only did this lower anxiety, but it made that anxiety more manageable. It compressed it into a more manageable range. So um, I thought, that kind of supplemented our conversation about the social support for anxiety. And here we have some more of the individual support we have for that state anxiety.
Yeah, and I think it's just another piece to show how the mindset piece, the psychological piece, is, in my view, the foundation of performance. We can spend all day in a batting cage. We can spend all day on a driving range, working with a swing coach, a hitting instructor, a pitching instructor, getting as physically talented as we possibly can, weight room, conditioning, and whatnot. But what changes from the batting cage or the bullpen session or the driving range for a golfer is when it's not the driving range and it's Augusta, Georgia, or it's our local golf club that we're playing our high school sectional tournament on, or the small college baseball diamond that you're playing a conference game on. And everything about it is the same, except the fact that now it's a game. And we put that, and that's where the pressure comes in, because we have, as an athlete, changed our mindset with that. So all the bullpen sessions, all the hitting instruction that we've had, all the driving range stuff can certainly help. But if we're not in the right mindset for that, if that self-doubt comes into play, if we're questioning our confidence, if we're not trusting ourselves and our skill set in the moment, we're not going to tap into that full potential that we have in that moment to do the best that we can. And that all goes back to the mindset training, the psychological skills, strategy, and techniques that we work with athletes on. That becomes a foundation for all that physical talent that you're trying to pull out of yourself.
Yeah. Right. And I think the categorical difference that athletes feel between training and perform and competition is something that I think I address a lot with my athletes. Like, what feels different about game day versus a practice? And it's often stakes, right? There's no stakes in practice. There's nothing on the line. And then all of a sudden there is, and that then, what you're thinking about goes from what am I doing to what are the outcomes? And we talk about, outcome focus all the time. And I think Rory, had the um, process over prize mantra to remind himself of that. But as so many things with sports psychology, it's easier said than done. In the heat of the moment, it's very hard to remind yourself of that message, which I think is why we do what we do beforehand. Preparing athletes for that moment. And then it's also helpful to have some sort of mantra or a process that reminds you of this exact things. And to your point, I think that's really one of the great tragedies of sports, and kind of why I got into this field personally. I've seen so many athletes that do everything right on paper, right? They don't miss a training day. They're in the weight room. They're eating healthy, and then competition day shows up, and they just wake up on the wrong side of the bed and are in a bad mood, bad mindset, and they just don't show up, and they don't perform. And it's like, for some athletes, that could be the difference between making the next level and not making the next level. And it's like, to see somebody put themselves through all of the things that athletes have to then let some thought or some emotion completely derail them. I think that's, like I said, it's a huge tragedy, and it really has motivated me to get into this field to help athletes avoid that situation. I don't think performance issues ever really come from nutrition or training. It's often, someone said something to you on the deck and it made you think a certain way, and then that, necessitated a bad outcome. Um, and so that's, I think that was great to bring up.
Yeah, and that's the reason I got into this. Is I was that player. As we talked about, I'm a baseball guy, and I was that guy that did fairly well in batting practice and in the bullpen sessions, and come to a game, and all of a sudden it was like, I always use the image of, you see the cartoon of the person's knees knocking, and that was me in the batter's box. And I come away from the field going, I could have played a lot better, and it wasn't because I needed more batting practice. It was I played so amped up and so tight and so anxious that I couldn't perform well. And I think our field has progressed obviously over the years, but I still feel that for some coaches this is still a challenge, that they understand possibly what this might be, but not how great of an impact it can have on their team, collectively and individuals. And I know you've probably experienced this as well too. A lot of times I will reach out to coaches about what we do and whatnot, and they'll let me know that, well, they're integrating some of that on their own, and I applaud their efforts with that. But they're also, um, as I'll use baseball. They grab a hitting instructor. There's a pitching instructor there. There's a strength and conditioning coach. Um, but there's still a little bit of a disconnect between the impact this can have, when they're mentioning to me that they've just incorporated some of it in just their everyday things. Again, fantastic to do, because a lot of coaches don't even entertain that. But I still feel we could do a better job as coaches, and I was one of them. And again, another reason why I got into this is because I saw kids, as you mentioned, with a ton of talent that I struggled to get as much out of, because I didn't understand the psychological aspects that was going on in their lives, and while they're playing the game, and to help coaches be us be a complement to what they're already doing can be so valuable to them individually as coaches, and to the team and to their programs as well too, to help them and help their kids understand how to use these strategies and techniques in their play.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's good that coaches are implementing and at least thinking about the psychology of what they're doing. In my experience, I think a lot of sports fields outside of ours, so coaching, athletic training, strength and conditioning, they all kind of pay lip service to sports psychology in some way or another. So the CSCS, the college strength and conditioning licensure, they have a chapter right on sports psychology. I know the head coach that I worked for, and my head coach as an athlete, he had a master's degree in coaching, and he said that he took one class in sports psychology. And while I think that's great, I think it's also not enough, right? It's enough for them to think that maybe they know what they're doing, but they're, it's a 3 years master's program, if not a PhD, to learn everything that we do. So, you can't really get it in a one chapter of a strength and conditioning textbook, or one class in a sports psych or in a coaching program. I think it's kind of akin to, like, in nutrition, someone saying, yeah, you should have protein after you work out. Like, yeah, but that's like as surface level as you could possibly get. Right. And so I think in our field, I think it will naturally come, right. We need to, um, kind of get out in front of coaches and athletes and teams a little bit more. But just that education piece, right? I think a lot of people think they know what we do, and like, oh, anxiety bad, goal setting good. But it's like, yeah, but now let's, that's kind of cracking the book. Now let's start reading reading the
Right.
text. So
Right.
um, I think, coaches and trainers and strength and conditioning PTs, they have enough knowledge to be dangerous, but not enough to really drive, improvement and drive performance improvements. Well, I think that actually leads perfectly into the main topic that we wanted to cover, and that's really the couple of different functions that sports psychology has. So, if you're a coach or somebody interested in coaching or working with athletes, I think our main topic today is going to be really interesting to you, about how sports psychology can help athletes train and improve their underlying potential, but then how we can also start to remove some of those performance detractors, those things like negative self-talk and fear of failure, and self-consciousness and things like that. So the overlying, or the underlying equation that I really like here is that performance equals potential minus interferences. So the way you perform is your potential, your trained potential, minus all of those different things that distract you from that potential. So um, I'll spend a little bit of time here talking about how, as mental performance coaches and sports psychology consultants, we can help athletes improve their potential. And then, Mike, I'd like you to spend a couple minutes talking about how we can maybe remove some of those interferences. So I think the very easiest thing we can do is coach education. You know, coaches are kind of the front lines with teaching athletes and teaching teams. And you know, as we had mentioned earlier, there's some coaches that don't really know, you know, how their words impact their players and what, you know, what they say, how that impacts the psychology of their athletes. So you know, my background academically and research wise is on positive coaching behaviors and how those impact players in a positive way. So I think, you know, there's kind of a standard of coaching where we want to like have our athletes compete against each other. You know, let's see how many free throws Sophie can make versus Claire, right? And then kind of highlight those differences and call them out. And I think that can lead to a lot of, you know, self-consciousness ideas, which I'll let you talk about here. But in a more positive way, right? What are some things that coaches can do to help athletes learn better? Um, and so, Mike, do you have any thoughts that you've, you know, used either in coaching or working with coaches?
Yeah, well, as we talked a little bit earlier about, is just introducing to them how real our thoughts and emotions are in playing a part in our physical performance. And so, what I try and do with coaches or with teams itself is helping them understand that process and then introducing strategies to help deal with that process. How can we become better at awareness of thoughts and awareness of emotions? Where are we at? We talked about Ken Ravizzo a little bit. I use his traffic light analogy a ton. Are you in green? Are you ready to go? Are you in yellow? Are you feeling a little bit off? Which we talked about the Masters. There was, I want to say, Rory was on 13 and he was ready for his second shot. And I don't know if it was a distraction from the crowd or he
Mm,
just didn't feel right, but he was ready to take his shot. He stepped away. It was in that moment, maybe he was in a yellow light situation going, I'm not really feeling it here. Let me step away for a second or two. He went through whatever his routine is, and we talk about a strategy about how to get back into your committed purpose in that moment. For him, it was that shot. How do you reset? How do you regroup back into that shot? But so we talk a lot about how thoughts lead to emotions, which leads to that physiological response, which could be either good or bad in terms of performing in that moment. And then how we can use strategies to help with those thoughts and emotions if we become better at that awareness piece. If our thoughts are on the negativity train, if our emotions are going haywire, how can we kind of use that as an understanding of, okay, how do I kind of either redirect those or introduce some new thoughts and emotions to kind of get back to my focus and my purpose here as well too. And also to help coaches understand that the psychological piece is not, you're not just born with it. It's not psychology by fire. What I mean by that is I always use the analogy of you're a swimmer, I'm not. And so when I was growing up to learning to swim, I had a lot of friends and family. If we were around a pool, go, oh, just throw Mike into the deep end. He'll figure it out. And maybe I could have. But at the end of that, if I got to the end of the pool, there might have been some trauma I was going through. I might have had a real fear, even more so of water than I did before. I got through it and that was nice, but I don't know if I learned it enough to understand how to do it again. And so I heard this from Michael Gervais a few years ago, but he mentioned, as all of us in the mental performance field, is all these skills, including confidence, can be learned. They're not just innate. They're not just, well, because you went through a 25 game season, you gained confidence kind of by osmosis kind of a thing. There might have been some snippets in there, but there's a real strategy and a technique and a way of understanding confidence and learning it. and helping yourself get better at it, that you can tap into that when you're going to get challenged. And you get challenged all the time, playing sports and in life in general. So we talk a lot about how those psychological skills can become such an integral part of an individual's performance. And then you put those individuals collectively on a team, and that team performance then naturally will go up. And so we talk a lot about that with coaches as well too.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I maybe will regret saying this, but I think the difficulty sometimes in that idea, I love the psychology by fire. And I think the difficulty with some of these topics is you could accidentally be an excellent athlete never knowing anything about sports psychology, right? Like you could not know and just kind of have developed some of these things naturally. But I think what that ignores is all of the people that didn't make that, right? That could have been that athlete with just a little bit of improvement or a little bit of change. The way that I've kind of thought about this recently is like, if you're a soccer player, you could probably play a full game, meaning like a full career in this analogy, with a cramp, right? Like you could get through a whole game with a cramp. You're not going to play very well. You're not going to enjoy it. You're not going to look back very fondly on the experience, right? And so this sports psychology topic and the sports psychology piece is addressing the cramp, right? We're addressing the piece of your mindset that is affecting you negatively, that's making you either play worse or not enjoy what you're doing. And that's, I think, the key piece is like, there are probably more athletes. I guarantee you there's more athletes that have never done sports psychology than have, right? But on the whole, I don't think those athletes, will have enjoyed their experience as much, will have done as well as they could have. Again, because they're leaving that development up to like incidentals. You kind of think about, and maybe this is a mixed metaphor here, but like, strength training. You could be naturally strong because you grew up on a farm and had to lift hay bales all day. But if you weren't born in that environment without unintentional training, intentional lifting, you're not going to just accidentally be strong. So you're taking kind of the chance part out of it. You're taking that like, well, maybe hopefully everything lines up so that I'm a mentally strong athlete. Like you're taking that out of it and you're putting that under your control. Like I'm going to be a strong athlete because I'm going to do this training. I'm not going to hope that it just happens. And I think that's the psychology by fire piece that I like.
Yeah, and I think that's as you just mentioned. I think that's more common than not, and I think we have there's a general sense of, well, you'll just figure it out, or you're either, like I mentioned before, I'll go back to that. You're either born with it or not, and it becomes not just the environment of sports, but in all kinds of things. Either you're good at math or you're not, or
Sure.
either you're good at this or you're not. Which, if you read Carol Dweck and mindset and just in general in mindset training, it's that's not necessarily the case, and all these things can be learned, and you can get better at that. And again, even just from a purely fans perspective, there are a number of athletes that we follow or teams that we follow that, I wonder what happened that so and so as an athlete. I thought he or she was supposed to be this really, really good athlete. And physically, they may have been, but probably, and there obviously are other factors, injuries, other personal situations that come into that. But in general, I think more so those athletes maybe didn't work on this part of the game. And so when the lights turned on, they really struggled with that mindset piece.
Yeah, the classic big fish in a small pond problem, right? Then
Right,
when you become
right,
a big fish in an even bigger pond, then now there's other fish you got to watch out for.
right.
Absolutely, yeah. I think going back to, again, the main topic of today's conversation about the idea of how coaches can, or how we can help coaches train that potential in athletes. I think a really practical skill, like very applied skill here is if you are a coach and you're demonstrating some motor pattern, right? You're demonstrating a golf swing, you're demonstrating a free throw. Athletes are very bad at watching and listening to the same person. So if you're up there explaining, the mechanics and you're demonstrating, the athletes are either watching what you're doing or they're listening to what you're saying. They're very rarely able to do both. And so if you're a coach, my recommendation here right off the bat is have somebody else demonstrate while you talk. So that allows athletes to watch, a peer of theirs demonstrate what you're trying to teach, and they get the more executive explanation from their coach. And so you're activating two different learning pathways there, rather than trying to mash everything into one message, which is that visual like demonstration, and then also the coach explanation. So little things like that can really help athletes improve that trained potential. I also thought back to, excuse me, Coach Dan Hurley and giving his athletes the space to kind of digest their own experience. In the long run, those athletes are going to be have a higher potential because they've actually, self-reflected. They've thought about the game. They've dealt with those negative emotions. Whereas if he had come in and just told each and every one of them exactly what they did wrong, what they need to do differently, they're not internalizing and learning that message. And so, there's different ways that coaches can help push that potential further and further. And then also on more of the individual side, Mike, you and I can help athletes work through some of those more personal interferences, which I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on.
Yeah, we always talk about understanding what your equation, as you mentioned, performance equals potential minus the interference. I use that a lot when we talk about how thoughts turn into emotions, turn into physiological responses, and we ideally the I in that equation needs to be zero, so you can pull out your full potential. But unfortunately, we're all human beings and we're not robots, and so the interference piece is really essentially how are we working with things like self-talk. Self-talk, especially negative self-talk, that's most of what our challenge is as humans and especially as athletes in performance. And how can we understand how to deal with self-talk to take that out of that interference number so that interference gets closer to zero? And so maybe it's some mantras we have, maybe it's some other positive or productive affirmations that we have when we get into the negative self-talk, or whether it's maybe a shift towards, I'm starting to think of, I better not three putt again, or I better not miss another free throw, to why should I feel good about my reasons to succeed in this moment, and tap back into the confidence. So that could be part of that, lowering that number of what that interference number is as well. Others, we alluded to this a little bit ago. How do I just focus in on the smallest element possible to execute here in this moment? I was working with a women's basketball team here locally for the season, and we broke the game down into offense, defense, and transition after every shot. So we tried to get into a habit of, if we're on offense and one of our teammates throws up the shot, now we've transitioned from offense to what? A possible rebound. So depending on what your role was on the team, what am I focused on in that moment as the shot's going up, and as it hits the rim or whatnot? If it goes down in, now we shift to defense. What is our role there? We're just focused in on one particular piece in that moment. Hard to do, as you mentioned, easier said than done. But if we can practice that, that is taking that interference piece and really simplifying what we're focused in on. So instead of trying to block out the noise, as you mentioned a little while ago, we turn that around and just focus in on one or two small elements. And again, that helps us with that interference piece, because that interference number then gets lower and lower and closer to that ideal zero that we'll never be able to get to.
Yeah, and there's some interesting research too about awareness and attention, and how there's a inverse relationship between what you're able to focus on and your anxiety. So as your anxiety increases, you're only able to focus on fewer and fewer things, right? You're kind of lasering in on what you're talking about or what you're thinking about. And so to your point, in those really stressful moments, it's going to be really hard to take everything into consideration, but it's going to be a lot easier to focus in on one thing, right? Exactly like you said. I think that's phenomenal. Now, in your work with athletes, and I know my answer to this question, but do you find that it's the interferences tend to be really big things, or are they tend to be really small things? And maybe if you understand my question.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And they're usually small things. I don't even want to say usually. I think they're always small things. And there might be two or three small things, but they're always small items that we try and help understand and bring to the forefront. I know a few podcasts ago we talked about, and you mentioned it here a few minutes ago, being reflective and how that can be an integral part of your growth as an athlete is taking time after a competition or after a week's worth of practices or something like that and reflecting back on what went well, what didn't go so well, and what we can improve on, what we learned about ourselves. And being reflective in those moments, you usually are more objective. And when we talk about the interference pieces, we find as athletes and us as mental performance coaches help bring this out, that those distractions are really small distractions that we can really help deal with and understand. And even the realization that they are small, all of a sudden you can almost, when an athlete realizes that, you can almost see their shoulders go down and exhale going, that wasn't as big of a deal as I thought it might be. And those are the kinds of things that can be a huge help to an athlete get in a better mindset, but aren't monumental in terms of the big or the small things as you described it, that what we try and work with with athletes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think when you have those big interferences, they're obvious, and because they're obvious, they're easy to deal with. I'm thinking, you know, so, tragically, like losing a family member right before a big game, like you're aware of that, that is a potential distraction or a potential interference. But the small things, like every time you step off the field, you run a list of all the errors that you made today, right? And you've done that since you were 10 years old, every single practice. And now you're a college junior and you're struggling with confidence. It's like, well, maybe that one dysfunctional pattern of behavior is the root cause, and it's not something that's hard to well, it can be hard to change, but I think the real difficulty is identifying it, because they're small repeated patterns of dysfunctional thinking. They're hard to notice, and so a lot of what Mike and I do in the early stages of our work is evaluate, talk to the athletes about their very very detailed experience. After you take a tee shot, what is the exact thought that you have, like as the ball is in flight, right? Like, what are the exact things that you're thinking about or focusing on at any given point in your game, in your practice, in your meet? It's finding those small dysfunctional habits and then addressing them. But I completely agree that it's almost never the big thing that you think it is. It's almost always something you've always done or never even really considered could be affecting your performance. I'll give you an example, from an athlete that I've been working with this year. Uh, Kind of a shy guy, says, when he is on a new team, doesn't go out of his way to be friendly with teammates. But then now, a couple years into the season, noticing that he doesn't feel very comfortable on the team, right? Because not very ingratiated, not very cohesive with the group. And it's like, well, let's maybe put our shyness, away, and do some things to get out of our comfort zone and make ourselves feel at home on this team. But again, it's just that pattern, that personality trait or that decision that athlete made, that just repeated over and over and over again, is what really shows up.
Sure, absolutely. It's usually the small things, right?
Absolutely. Well, I think a great anecdote to what we're talking about, to this compounding negativity or compounding self consciousness, is journaling, and journaling in an intentional way. And that leads us to our mental fitness challenge. So if you stuck around this far, congratulations. You now have we're gonna talk about some practical tools that you can put in place. So a daily win log is very easy to keep. Just takes a piece of paper and a pen. But what you want to do is keep track of something that you're proud of accomplishing each day. So I like to think of it as something that's a little bit more unique each day. So going to work or getting things turned in on time. Those types of things are great, but not really what we're thinking about here. So unique situations that arise every day, right? Maybe you absolutely didn't want to go to the gym that day, but you found a way to motivate yourself and you got there and you had a great session, right? That's something you could write down. The second piece of the challenge this month is to then write what it is about you that led to that win. So maybe you're a very determined person and the thought of skipping a workout wasn't acceptable to you, and so you held high standards and that was what you wanted to write down. But the general idea here is that you're reminding yourself that you are winning, right? That you do have things to be proud of each day. It can be very easy to laser in on the negatives, and then those negatives impact us compoundingly in a big way. So break that cycle with recognizing some small win each day. And then after the month is up, you'll have 30 different small wins that you've done and 30 different personality traits that you're proud of. And that can be a really powerful motivator, a really powerful confidence booster.
Yeah, and I think the key to that, and we struggle as human beings with this, is to pull out positive elements. When I do something called a confidence resume with my athletes, and usually the first couple of times we do that, it's they struggle to pull out stuff because we want to hammer ourselves all the time, as you just alluded to. So pulling out the small wins is an important piece to practicing that, because and to really objectively look at and not be afraid to think of ourselves as a determined person, as you just mentioned as an example. The reason why I got to the gym this morning was everything from I set my alarm clock and I got myself up instead of hitting the snooze button and things along those lines. But really, if we can step back and be objective and say, well, why did we do that? And to honestly and to it is perfectly okay to say, you know what, because I'm determined to do this. You're not, it's not, because I think for a lot of us, we feel like, well, that's being arrogant. I don't want to be, Miss or Mr. Cocky person or anything like that. And it's not. It's you being honest about an attribute that you have that you want to continue to grow. There's a difference between being arrogant overall personality wise or being arrogant in your extreme belief in your ability to execute in the moment. And I think that's part of it. And practicing small wins can be a huge impact in understanding how you can do that and understanding how that can lead to you just mentioning perfectly. After a few weeks, you could all of a sudden have, holy smokes, you look back, you say, I've got 25, 30. Look at all these small wins. Look at all the good things I've done. And you could probably find a common theme in there: determination, better at, I've gotten more confident as time has gone on. I've become more resilient. You could start using a number of really powerful phrases to start to reduce a little bit of that negative self-talk that maybe starts to naturally come about, and it starts to get contradicted by now all these small wins that now you've got positive self-talk that you're introducing to your everyday performances as well too. So it could be huge piece of an exercise piece that can help you as time goes on. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it works in two ways. So I think the first one, like you said, it makes you recognize things more often, recognize little things and small things. But then I've also noticed with athletes, they come back and say, because I knew I was going to have to write something down, I went out to make a win, right? I went out to like that. The reason that I went to the gym was because I wanted to be able to write it down later. And so I think both things are super helpful. So the journal can become kind of that motivator, the thing that keeps you accountable. But then it also, as you said, it's starting to build that skill of recognizing positive, uh, traits and skills and things like that. I think, and I just wrote this down, but I think there's also a sense of safety in self-criticism. It's almost a defense mechanism. Like I've noticed this a lot with maybe my coaching experience where you say something to an athlete like that was a great swim, and the first thing they say was like, yeah, but this happened, yeah, but it wasn't my best, yeah. And I think it's a protective feature because it's very hard for us as human beings to really admit that we put everything on the line, because there's some vulnerability in that, right? Like
Right.
you're laying all your cards out and saying, I want to be judged on how good I am. And so there's a almost a bravery, I think, that comes with like recognizing your own strengths and being willing to embrace that vulnerability. And I think this is a small step towards that, because it is very, very challenging to be that vulnerable. And circling all the way back to our master's conversation here, I don't know if it was an interview, and I should have researched this better, but it was an interview from this master's or last master's. But Rory, they were asking him about kind of this, like how he had like was a 17-year drought, and like hadn't won a major, or a masters at least, and like how did you stay in it? And he said for a long time he always felt like he was holding something back, like he wasn't playing full throttle golf. And I think again it was that idea of like you're protecting yourself, because you can always say like I didn't play my best round. But if you do play your best round and you admit that to yourself and you get second, that's a more challenging thing to admit. And so I think this daily win log is kind of a short practical start on that process, but it is a bigger idea that I think comes with some weight for us as athletes and just as humans in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned that because I talked to Scotty Scheffler after the Masters yesterday, and his first two rounds weren't very good. And they had mentioned, and he only lost by 2 shots. If he would have had a quote unquote normal Scotty first couple of rounds, he probably would have won by about 4 or 5 shots. But they even asked him before yesterday, before he started yesterday, the same thing. And his answer was the same both times. He's like, I actually felt I played really well on Thursday and Friday. The scores just weren't there. And I just felt like as long as I keep playing the way I'm playing, the scores will be there. And so to your point, he was like, you know what? I didn't think I played bad. That was the best I could on Thursday and Friday. And he was laying it all out there for all of the audience to hear. And like, okay, I shot 2 over or even par or whatever. I really don't care because to me, that was the best I could do. But to your point, the using the word vulnerability is huge, and courage it is, because in a lot of ways, I think we feel like we're supposed to hammer ourselves. I don't know how
Mhm.
many times, even as fans of certain situations or athletes, as somebody strikes out, your example of Dion, you're expecting that person to throw a helmet or to smash a bat because otherwise they don't care, right? Which
Yes.
is farthest from the truth. And I think if you're the athlete, you feel like, well, I've got to show something. I've got to do something here. So I'll just hammer myself, maybe in a real physical, emotional way that everyone can see, so everyone can understand that, yes, I care about this. But it does take
Yeah.
a vulnerability to say, you know what? I tip my hat off to the pitcher. That was just a great pitch, and I didn't get you this time. Or I tried my best here, and I fell 2 shots short of winning. But that's okay, and I'm okay with that. That's hard for a lot of us. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that just speaks maybe to like the kind of the pure philosophy of sport, right? And then you think back to how sports began. It was two people saw a tree over there and said, "I'll race you to it." Right? That's
Yeah.
and
Right.
and and it is. You're putting yourself on the line and seeing how you stack up. And I think that's where we sometimes talk about like a gamer. Someone who just shows up and wants to game. They want to see if they can, regardless of the odds, if they can come out on top. And I think this is all sort of that mindset of being vulnerable and willing to put yourself out there, and then being honest and being like, that was my best, and it just wasn't what I had today. So I think those are great perspectives, and I really hope that the folks listening start the daily win log, because I think once you start it, you'll really, really see the impact and the benefit that you can pull out of it. So, yeah, Mike, did you have any final thoughts here before we sign out?
It was great talking with you again. It's great to have springtime again. Like I mentioned before, here in the northern part of the country. So I'm a golf hacker, so it was fun to kind of get motivated over the weekend about playing some golf and getting out there. And so when Rory hit it into the trees, I know we were talking about it just informally beforehand. It was like, oh, that's my shot on a regular basis. So no, hopefully everybody gets out there and takes our mindset challenge this time. And no matter whether you're an athlete or not, I think that challenge can be true in any walk of life. And writing down and journaling your small wins can be helpful in a number of different spaces in our lives in general. So I hope everyone takes that to heart and runs with it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate your insights and perspectives. I always feel like I walk away a better mental performance coach and have a better understanding of sports in general. But
Same
uh,
here. Appreciate it.
absolutely. Well, that's a wrap here for episode 21 of the Mental Barbell Podcast. If you found value in today's discussion, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend or coach. For more mental performance training and personalized coaching, visit thementalbarbell.com or follow us on social media at The Mental Barbell. That's all for now. We'll see you next month.